Hello, you're on cue with Lakeshore Records. I'm your host, Aaron Vehling of Vehlingo.com. My guest today is Kris Bowers, who created the phenomenal score for Bad Hair. It's a film directed by Justin Simien, and it's set in 1989, a horror satire. It follows an ambitious young woman played by Elle Lorraine who gets a weave in order to succeed in the image-obsessed world of music television. However, her flourishing career comes at a great cost when she realizes that her new hair may have a mind of its own. So it stars Lorraine, also Vanessa Williams, Lena Waithe, Laverne Cox, Jay Farrow, Kelly Rowland, Blair Underwood, James Vanderbeek, and Usher. It's a pretty epic cast and just a fascinating film. And what Kris Bowers does, along with Kelly Rowland and with Justin Simien, is they have this sort of nice balance between these late 80s New Jack Swing songs and Bowers' score. And his score is this just hyper nuanced electronic jazz infused Penderecki kind of experiment, and it works out very well. So today we're going to talk with him about that. And of course, make sure you go check out the score and the film, which are available now. The score is available via Lakeshore Records. You can find it in the digital realm, and you can also find the film Bad Hair on Hulu. So, go get on that. But before you do that, let's listen to Kris and dive into his world. All right, we're on with Kris Bowers, composer of Bad Hair. How are you doing today?
Good, Aaron. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm filled with so much energy after listening to this soundtrack. What you and Justin Simien and Kelly Rowland have put together. It's this amazing balance of this New Jack Swing, which is some of the best music ever invented, with your incredibly creative and experimental score. It's an interesting balance, I think. Let's dive into this New Jack Swing stuff. This is some legitimate Teddy Riley sounding. I mean, it's like, so the film takes place in 1989, and the music sounds like it's straight out of 1989. And I'm curious, how you three did this, because I was reading about how Justin not only directed this, but also wrote some of these songs. If you could tell us a little bit about the backstory behind these amazing songs.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, basically, sorry, my dog is feels like she's needs to play right now at this moment. Basically, when Justin first approached me, it was funny because he's always talked about wanting to do some sort of musical project, and he mentioned that he had been working on these songs, and we met maybe we got it together maybe a year or maybe even longer before he started shooting. And he showed me these demos of these songs that were pretty fleshed out, that he had produced himself and he made the beats himself and he was singing himself. And a lot of them were songs that he wrote years ago. And he kind of said that he's been trying to find a way to essentially put these songs in something. And then once he showed them to me, we talked about the best way to approach it. And I basically took those initial demos of his and did as much research as possible and dug into, bought a bunch of old vintage synths from the 80s, a bunch of drum samples and things like that. And then, and we actually had the chance to talk to Teddy Riley about his process, which was really eye-opening and incredibly helpful. And so then I just reproduced and reimagined those original ones that he had, and then we came up with a couple of other ones together.
So what are some tips that Teddy gave you? Because once the listeners hear this soundtrack, they're gonna be like, oh, this is literally 1989. Like it's amazing. It sounds like. So what are some tips that he gave you on how to achieve the Teddy Riley sound?
One of the biggest things that I walked away from our conversation with was he played all of his parts all the way through. So every sample, whether it's a tambourine part or a snare part or a hi-hat part, he played that. He programmed it live all the way through the whole song as if he were a player. And what that does is, although you might listen to it and it feels like the tambourine's playing the same exact part. If you listen to it throughout the whole song, it's actually slightly varying throughout the whole thing because he's playing it live. And that gives this life to the song in a way that feels like a band is playing it, even though other than the guitarist Adam Agati, who's incredible, it's playing on it, everything else is all samples and it's all, me essentially. And so I think that playing it live like that, the way that Teddy Riley approached it, really helped it feel more like this band playing as opposed to just a bunch of samples and loops.
Oh, that makes sense. Did you listen to New Jack Swing when you were growing up? Now I know that we're both, on the younger side, younger 80s kids, but I remember, listening to this stuff on the radio when it would come on.
Yeah, same. I definitely was a huge fan of most of the stuff. I mean, between like all the early Boyz II Men stuff or the Janet and Michael Jackson. I mean, that's another conversation. But I think musically, I thought that all that stuff had such a huge impact on me as a kid, and even the earlier '80s stuff. I think I've heard because of my older cousins or my parents, and my dad knows all that like Guy and like Johnny Gill stuff incredibly well, and so like you said, I feel like it's such a nostalgic thing. I almost forgot until I really dove back into it for this film, and every song I listened to, I was like, man, I remember this. And it just like takes you right back to that time period.
Yeah, it's like you hear the rhythms and you hear that like synth bass, and it's phenomenal stuff. And it's a good reference to like also Flight Time did a lot of this kind of music when you mentioned Janet Jackson. So we have that element to sort of help set the stage of the story, but then you have this score that is a little bit different, and it's I've heard people say it sounds like Penderecki. It has also some sort of more modern ambient synth sounds, and then some just this nuanced sort of like tension to it that is like very cinematic. And could you tell us a little bit about how you created this score for Bad Hair, the score cues?
Yeah, definitely. One, I think that, again, with Justin being such an incredible director, he really pushed me to look at kind of like the 60s and 70s eras of horror film for the score inspiration, and looking at like Rosemary's Baby or even The Shining and, the music from those films. And at the same time, for me, wanting to figure out how to make it feel as 80s as possible without going full on 80s, as far as like having I think with wanting that heavy of an orchestral sound from those other references that he had, I felt like the synths then needed to be more textural or more ambient, like you said, or kind of like provide these other elements that the orchestra's not providing. Instead of like a lot of 80s horror movies, the synths kind of started to like almost like play exactly what the orchestra would play, but with synths, which was an interesting take. And so this was kind of a little different. But I feel like then from there, especially with the synth stuff, it was a lot of improvising and kind of messing around to picture. Like I really had a lot of fun playing around with my my tape echo for this, and like running my Juno through my pedal board into this tape echo. And then a lot of the weird sounds that you hear throughout the thing are just the tape echo being really messed up. I think I actually might have broke it while I was working on this, but like it already had this weird pop because of the tape was a little messed up. And so I would basically run the tape echo by itself and catch that pop, and then turn the feedback all the way up so that it was almost like, kind of like, getting a little too crazy essentially, but capturing those kinds of sounds and then shaping it to the picture. And it was, a lot of fun to kind of mix that with the sound of like The Shining and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I definitely hear that in there. Was what sort of stood out about scoring this film for you? What was some of the like most memorable elements, or something that really was meaningful about it?
I think one of the things that was fun for me was thinking about the main theme for this possessive demonic spirit, the weave itself. And I was trying to figure out how to represent something that was slightly primitive sounding, just because a lot of the folklore that Justin created for this story, and then at the same time having it feel like it fits in this sonic world that we created for the score and all of that. And so for that theme, I kind of mess around with like my kalimba and like different percussive instruments that I've just collected from traveling, and things that I felt matched that feeling, and then also layered on some of the synth sounds and things like that. And then the melody became this 12-tone row essentially, and like to kind of represent this more angular, slightly like maybe a high art kind of approach to this thing or whatever. But meshing all those things together, I think came up with this theme that I feel like is I don't know, one of the themes I'm most proud of that I've worked on.
Yeah, I've listened to it probably I think 10 times since I got the
oh man. Oh, thank you. That's awesome.
Mildly obsessed.
That's awesome. I really appreciate that.
But I also like that you bring so you have a jazz background. I mean, you went to Juilliard for jazz. You have a bachelor's and a master's in jazz performance, right? From Juilliard?
Yeah.
And so you have you come from actually, like, you have that sort of element to it. And I know that you've noted in the past that you have I think you said you had influences like Oscar Peterson and Duke Ellington. Mm-hmm. But how did you get into film scoring itself? Because there's something else I kind of skipped over, is you also have this part of your timeline in which you worked in sort of like R&B and pop and hip hop as well. So you've had this interesting trajectory, sort of kind of gathering all of these influences and modalities together that you bring to the table when you score a film.
Yeah, it's really interesting how that happens. I mean, I think it's just kind of the same for every composer, but for myself, it's been interesting to. I really felt from a very young age that I wanted to be a film composer, and fell in love with basically just just John Williams scores pretty much. I feel like being a kid of the 90s, like, growing up watching all those Spielberg movies and feeling like so much nostalgia from these like huge orchestral scores, and all those things still have such a soft I still have such a soft spot for every one of those scores. And so because of that, I really decided early on that I wanted to find a way to get into it. And I think once I discovered people like Terrence Blanchard and realized that there were people that like went from being a musician to then scoring and then balancing a career as a performing artist and a composer. And then outside of that, especially as I got into college, then you had Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross starting to score films, and like, right. Johnny Greenwood. And it made me more excited about this idea of, like you said, taking all this experience I had as a player and as a musician and trying to figure out a way to use the empathetic side of being a composer in this aspect of film scoring. And it's been cool to find all these ways of, like, just as you said, how things that I've done in the past somehow have like made me a little bit more prepared to handle some of the demands of the projects I'm working on now.
Right, exactly. Terrence Blanchard, he's just amazing. It's just phenomenal. His recent score for Da 5 Bloods was wow.
Yeah, incredible.
Blew my mind. So for when you were working on Bad Hair, were there any sort of like super challenging segments that you were scoring, or any sort of like throw everything at the wall and that like, come on, I can't, why won't this work? I can't get this, this to work or something like.
Yeah, like I think that that main theme again was a difficult one that took a little bit of time to get at, and that was for the first time I wrote it was for the section where she's getting the weave put into her head. And then I think just kind of that whole ending, just once the first, it's one of those types of films, I don't want to give away too much, but it's one of those kinds of things where you're on the edge of your seat for a decent amount of time, and then all hell breaks loose essentially. And I think from that point on, the music is just at 10 from that point until the end of the movie, and trying to find a way to keep that energy going in a way that doesn't feel like we're, sick of hearing just like
Right.
loud noises and screaming essentially, and finding a way to go up and down. But that's also just following Justin and his incredible directing, and how much, that he really laid it out so that I just had to follow the path that was already set before me. I think it was just kind of a challenge for me musically to really do something that I felt could hold up to what I wanted the score to do.
Right, right. And you've actually worked with Justin at least one other time, right?
Yeah, we work on Dear White People together on the show. And
Right.
so this is our first feature together, but we've been on the show now we're starting our 4th season now.
Yeah, yeah. That's a great show, and the music's awesome too.
Thank you. Yeah, it's fun.
But one thing I'm always curious about is when you have a director and a composer who sort of work together on multiple films. Like you mentioned John Williams and Spielberg. I think of Cliff Martinez and Nicholas Winding Refn, or Cliff when he worked with Steven Soderbergh, Spike Lee and Blanchard. I mean, the list goes on really with that sort of dynamic, and like Lynch and Badalamenti. What sort of, like, how does that differ for you when you have somebody who you sort of already have worked with and have a rapport with? How does that impact your compositional process?
Yeah, I think it's there's a level of trust that gets developed, and trust that we understand each other, and understand each other's process, and understand that, I think that Justin knows by now, that even if it's going to take me a long time to get him something, that it's mainly because I'm trying to put my all into it, and I appreciate the fact that I think about with Bad Hair how long I spent on some of these cues, and how patient he was through all that. And then I think that he really could only be that patient because he knew he had that trust in me from 3 years of working together, he knew exactly what was taking so long, and why I was taking my time with it, and different things like that. And and with it musically, I rarely get notes from Justin. Often he really will maybe make some small notes if I've really missed the boat as far as what we needed emotionally, but otherwise he's incredibly trusting with my approach, and accepting of it. And I think that my favorite collaborators kind of have that mentality. Like I always thought about that whenever I was putting together a band for myself or for something else. It's always like wanting to hire the greatest drummer, the greatest bass player, the greatest whatever, and let them do what they're going to do. And I'm not going to tell you how to play drums. You just play drums the way you do, and that's why you're here, because I like the way that you do it. And it's really great to work with a collaborator like that.
Does that come from having a jazz background? I feel like with jazz, everybody kind of, it just like speaks to each other through like this other level, but everybody's still kind of independent. I could be wrong, but
man, I think that there's something really magical about that. I think that it's difficult when ego gets involved and things like that, but the most amazing moments are when everybody in that space is egoless. Like Terrence's band is pretty incredible in that way, the way they play together. They've always played together. But I think the best example of that for me personally was like Miles in the 60s with Herbie Hancock and Ron Carter and Tony Williams. And they are all just giving and receiving from each other in this way that is so organic, and it creates these amazing things. And I feel like that's it's like the purest form of collaboration when you can really do that.
Yeah. I think and you can feel, the listener can feel that when everybody sort of has that symbiosis or whatever it is. There's it has a strong resonance. One thing I think is interesting with horror films, I think of Bad Hair. You think of any horror film that's come out in many years. You have this this opportunity. It feels like with genre films like horrors, you have an opportunity to like people have an opportunity to express themselves, or kind of like go all out in ways that maybe you wouldn't be able to in another
Totally.
like a tent pole or a drama or something like that. And I'm curious if
Totally.
like working on this, you were kind of able to kind of let loose and work on like yeah, like let loose and kind of do different things.
Yeah, 100%. I think that like this, there's something very visceral about the way this score feels to me for that reason, just because it felt like, yeah, I'm just gonna go wild and like not even think about, like not restrain myself
Yeah.
at all, really. And I think that that's a pretty cool, like you said, freeing space to be in, and doing that when you know that like there are definitely spots where I need to be more mindful and
Sure.
tasteful and all of that. But like, I think that having that wide of a dynamic range, I think that a lot of the projects that I've worked on, the dynamic range with the music is maybe a little bit uh, shallower, not in a negative way, but more so just that we're not. There's no need to go that big, and there's
Right. It's what the
yeah,
content calls for. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And when you have something that's, I just think the horror genre calls for that level of really really extreme highs and really really extreme lows, and playing with that, and that's part of what makes the genre fun. And yeah, so I definitely felt like I'd let loose with this one in a lot of ways.
So does your experience on this kind of like are you interested in scoring more horror films?
Yeah, I definitely am. I think that for me, it's always primarily about the story and the
Yeah.
intention above all else. Like, I think that my favorite horror films are like that, like The Shining, or
Hmm.
I think about, I forget the director's name, but the director that did Hereditary and Midsommar.
Oh, Ari
Um,
Aster.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
like those types of horror films that really not only make you think, but also are trying to do something really unique with the music and the sound and how they approach it. I think I would love to do more of that. You know, yeah, for sure.
So when you're looking at the Bad Hair project and you're looking at the dozens of cues you put into it and these amazing New Jack Swing songs that people are going to be playing all the time, like what do you want people to get out of this music and out of the film?
I just hope it starts conversation, and I don't know if there's anything specific that I think anybody should get from it, because I feel like it's such a tough individualized experience. Like, I think the Black community and every Black person, male or female, probably has plenty of stories about their hair and their experience with their hair and their experience with their hair in this society. And so I think that it's really just about having a conversation about that, and whatever comes of that is interesting. I think the conversation is kind of the most important thing to me.